Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwugta.
This is Merps, and this week we're bringing you a special guest, a very well-known guest. We have Shadybunny returning to educate us and teach us about the KFT meta. Thank you for coming on, Shady.
Hi guys, happy to be here as always.
This is I haven't counted how many times Shady's been on here, but this is at least the fifth time. And he was last on in February on the Lightforge before the 7.1 changes or even. And I remember we talked about some of the upcoming changes. So it's gonna be we're gonna span the whole entire gamut from Ungoro to KFT now and all the arena changes. If you don't know who Shadybunny is, Infinite Arena streamer. We were just talking how far back we went from. If you guys have been a fan of the stream since literally before we were Twitch partners, we ran this thing called the Poacherlizer, where if you had a infinite like arena record, I think it was like 7 wins per run or something, you could just email me and then we just do a co-op. And we had Shady. That's when we first met Shady. And it has been. He's now on F2K. And you know, his own stream is doing amazingly, and he was the last time he tried for the leaderboard was June, and it was number 10 in EU with Forsaken. So welcome, Shady.
Thank you. Yeah, it had been too long. I was actually thinking about it. It was funny, like I was thinking about, hey, you know, I should really talk to Adwood Merps again, and Merps was like, hey, you want to be on the live?
I sensed it. Awesome. You know, it had been too long. We both sensed it. All right. But nice to have you back on. Before we get into other stuff, should we take care of the business that just came out recently?
Yeah, the business, the exciting news. Like, you thought you were going to hold on to this for a while, right? Like, let's be honest. And it only took, what, like 2 months? It only took 2 months.
2 months. But what we're talking about are the newly released arena leaderboards and Dreads. All right, let's just get right to it. Dreads crushed it, right? Crushed the competition. In NA, Dreads led the pack with a 9.4 average. All right, this is like, you know, he didn't have like any soft Frost Festival meta like I did to step on noobs with, right? Get my free wins. 9.4, absolutely dominating the competition. Second place was Meow Ethan, you know, obviously Meow Clan. We're gonna see them a lot, right? Was number 2 with an 8.57, which is just insanely good. Anyways, and then we have sort of a natural, you know, great like a natural curve downwards with Ice Slasher at 8.47, Zaraxa at 8.43, like what you expect, right? But then from number 1 to number 2, you know, Dreads to Meow Ethan, we have this insane jump of almost 1 full win, like 9.4 to 8.57. So huge congrats to Dreads for absolutely destroying Arena in this 1 month. And also, like,
absolutely shattering the old record holders. Some guy named Merps at like 9.2 something. Oh, not even close to 9.4.
I know, not close at all. But congrats to Dreads. Also, congrats to a lot of other familiar names and faces on the leaderboard. We have Kamudar at number 9. We have Hafu. We have, I'm looking through all of this. Okay, I did not prepare it super well.
Wow. Wow.
I know. We have Isherwood, we have Brian Wong, we have Jirachier. If I missed you, I heavily apologize. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that this month it's the month of Dreads, right?
It is definitely the month of Dreads.
Yes. So big congrats to him, and we will get him on the future Lightforge. Yes.
Yes, we will do it. Whether he agrees or not, we will drag him onto the Lightforge.
Yep. You will reveal your secrets, Dreads.
Cool. That's the first thing I asked, because Dreads was talking about how good Priest was in this meta, and I was like, immediately on Reddit, I was like, so, what do you do with Priest, huh? Well, the meta's still applicable. I'm going for this month's leaderboard. What do I do?
It's like, hey, what would you recommend I play? Oh, man.
Anyway, huge shout out to Dreads, and yeah, leaderboard. It's like there was always a question about whether the leaderboards are going to just like create an arms race and everyone's going to keep going higher, or if it'll just like top out at some point. And it looks like, what did Victor get back in the day on EU? Like in like, I don't think like February.
It was like a 9.2.
It was like right, like 9.2, 9.3, like something around there, right? Which was insane, and that was the old highest one that didn't have a Frost Festival free win in it. Wait, no, it was even higher than that, I think, because I remember he beat you. Like you didn't beat Victor, like Merps, your score.
That's true.
So he would have been like 9.3 at least.
9.34 or so.
9.34, there we go. Okay, so he was 9.34. Dreads is 9.4. I think that's like your highest, like even when you start rolling the dice a lot and you're high rolling and you're a really insanely good player and the stars line up. That seems that area has been hit twice now by like normal stuff, and you've hit very close to it in in the Frost Festival. So it's interesting that is what I would consider right now, like the everything is going perfectly, and I am playing Hearthstone Arena, and I am good at this game. Like
it's like was the 4 minute mile or so right now?
Yeah,
the barrier. Yeah, just gotta start breaking it, man.
So excited to see if the meta ever gets to a point where we can break that. But 9.4, 9.5, I would say is probably the limit. If you're sitting here on a like a 5-win average, that's still really good. But if you high roll, you could get almost double that apparently.
But it's like it's still good. But let's be honest here, you're no Dreads, Oh gosh. Yeah, no, it is pretty insane because I remember us talking about it's like, oh, what is the limit, right? Like when this thing just started, what is the limit? And I think at that time we were just like, oh, 9 is like that's kind of like impossible, right? Like 9 or 9.1, that's like, oh my gosh, everything has to go right. Because once you go past 7, the wins get so harder. Like going from a 7.0 to a 7.5 average is really hard. 7.5 to an 8 average is really hard.
Because the question is, how much does like a 5-win run, which is a totally normal number of wins to get in a run, even if you're really, really, really good, right? Like that'll happen a few times. How much does that hurt your rating? Like hurt your average? And when you're averaging 9, that kills it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I like during my run, I remember, I think I had 1 4-win run. I was just like, oh god, this crushes my average. Like it just totally destroys my average. And it's just like a 4-win. And if you get like a 2-win, forget it. You need to spend like the next 6 runs just like absolutely dominating in order to make up for that 2-win run. So yeah. Anyways.
That is the leaderboard, and we'll talk more about it whenever we get Dreads on. But let's go back into KFT, into what we're actually playing right now in the KFT meta. And you've heard our insights. We've delved like pretty deep over the course of the last month onto like various things in KFT, our ranking of the classes, how to play. And now we have Shadybunny, an amazing arena player who always has like a slightly different take on things than we do, because me and Merps are fairly similar in terms of like Hunter aside, we're pretty similar in how we play the game. So it's always good to see someone else's like another really good player's perspective on this. So I'm going to start with like a really basic question. Top 3 classes in KFT.
So according to my stats right now, Rogue number 1, which I think is no surprise for anyone. Paladin number 2, which for me is a little uncharacteristic. I usually do a little bit worse than Paladin. And then Warlock number 3. But like Paladin, Druid, Warlock, they're kind of close together, I would say.
Yeah. So I actually looked through my own record after like talking with you earlier today, and I was very surprised by how high Warlock is. And it's one of my top classes by win rate as well. But in my head, I always thought like, oh, Warlock, I remember all these bad things that happened to me as a Warlock. But it turns out like it's doing quite well. We currently have on our tier list like Rogue, Paladin, and Druid as first tier, and Warlock in the second tier with Hunter and Mage. But I think we're going to move it up. So just focusing in on Warlock. what specifically, like, what's so great about Warlock that it is joining Rogue and Paladin, which have been, you know, always top classes for the entirety of 2017?
So, like, to understand that, it's more about like getting the general vibe of what's happening in KFT, right? And what makes you win, what makes you lose. And it's very important, like in Arena always, right? It's always been very important to have the board, but even more so than now, because you have cards like Bone Mare, Valkyr, Scalebane, Corpse Raiser, Dead Speaker, etc., etc. There's just all these cards that just say, if you are the attacker, if you get to choose, if your minion attacks his minion, you get all these really nice benefits. And Warlock has some cards that can affect the board from out of your hand. You have a Dreadlord, you have even Drained Soul, right? Can do that. You can have the File. You just have out of hand spells or minions that just say, okay, I don't just have to play a minion into your minion, and I can try to flip the board and make it so that I can then again choose which attacks what on the board. And then that's where you get huge bonuses. And a lot of the other classes just have to go through the motions. Just have to go like, well, I hope my curve's going to be good, and I hope that I'm the person that chooses, you know, which minion attacks which minion. And Warlock just gets to go like, well, it didn't go that well, but I'm just going to Hellfire and try again. Or I'm going to Defile and then play my 3-drop and try again.
Yeah, we talked about this previously. It's like in a meta in which a lot of other classes either lost AoE or lost sort of initiative out of hand, Warlock gained, right? So they not only gained more so than other classes, it's like they have like very creative ways of dealing with the board. It's not just like one-dimensional ways, right? Like they have so many ways now, and you take away that ability for other classes, and suddenly Warlock, it just like the sort of gap has widened so much. Like they have a lot more ways to do it, and they have just like a huge quantity of like ways to clear your board.
Yeah, it's just such good cards, right? Defile and Dreadlord, that you're going to pick them. They're there, and they add that dimension to the Warlock in terms of consistency and in terms of just being different than their other removals. I think you mentioned at some point, like earlier, that like I remember we did this in the last like Arena Coup for Warlock. Like we just, you don't want to take Hellfires as much anymore. Not because, especially in the early draft, not because they're bad. They're actually really good right now, but
yeah, for sure.
There's just too many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does happen where you just have a deck with 3 Defiles and 2 Hellfires, and you're like, well, I mean, maybe I'm going to need all that, but probably not. I mean, it's going to be a little weird. Like I've still been, especially lately, I've just been putting a lot of emphasis on the curve, because you might hear this and you're like, oh, okay, so removal, that means I'm going to build a control Warlock, and I'm just not going to pick any early curve, just going to pick some reactive cards, and then just some big cards, because that's what control is, right? No early game, no removal, then big cards. And in Arena, it's just that even if you're a control deck, you're still going to want some early curve.
Yep.
And especially with Warlock right now, I feel like you just do the same the other people are doing. You just try to get your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, only you have some special perks, right? Your 5-drop AoE is your board, or you can use a Defile in between, or, you know, Hellfire if necessary.
Yeah, and I think this leads to like the biggest difference between Un'Goro and KFT, which we covered before, but I want to delve into it and jump off this, which is, in Un'Goro, there was a lot of like swingy cards and whatnot, but each class had a pretty defined identity. And it was even more so the case probably in MSG, where they're like, you are hand buffs, you do potion things, you are Jade. And now in KFT, like you said, all the classes kind of vaguely play the same with these heavy KFT neutral cards and the relatively, you know, either vanilla or bad KFT class cards. What do you think are the classes like most affected by it, or how does that affect how you play? Like, what do you do differently knowing that? How can that help you as a Hearthstone player?
Oh, you mean like, how do I use the information that everyone's gonna play kind of similar?
Yeah, or like, I don't know, in your drafts or when you're reading the opponents.
Yeah, so it just makes the game plan almost always the same, right? So my drafts are a lot less, like before you would have your draft and you'd have to be very conscious of which classes were strong, because you're like, right, I'm going to play Rogue. but there's a ton of mage. So I'm gonna need some finishes. I'm gonna need some reach to destroy them, or I'm gonna need some really strong, 5+ HP minions to dodge portals and flame strike. And right now, it's like everyone's trying to do the same thing. So the formula is the same every time, right? Just try to get strong early game, have your own win conditions in Scalebane, Bone Mare, etc. And then try to pick some nice, reactive cards if your class allows for it, like Rogue can have Shadowblade and Backstab, etc. So that information just makes the draft, a lot more standard. Like there's less, I need to be less in tune with the meta and feel what's happening. It's more about, well, Bone Mare's still going to be good, Scalebane's still going to be good, everyone's going to be picking those cards. I just want to make sure I curve properly. Like a very specific example is 3-drops are huge for me now. Like I don't think I've skipped the Tark Reaper, because that card just means that you won't lose the board unless you had a really bad start and your opponent had an awesome start.
Yeah.
Frost Rider, another one of those cards. I can just say you skip turn 2, but you play Frost Rider, so you're still in it, right? You haven't lost yet. You can still get that board.
So I'm curious, when you say like you draft more standard now, does that sort of mean you just draft a lot of kind of like the most valuable card because everyone is playing standard? Because that's what I find myself doing a lot. Like I don't find the need to be like, I need to do, play or draft a certain way to counter the quote meta, right? Because I'm just like, I just need a good deck a lot of times. And I still need curve, obviously. I still want reactive cards, but I don't need to say like, well, I need to exactly like be on the board, like if I have reactive cards, or, I don't really need reactive cards if I can just be on the board. I'm just like, if I just have good cards, I'll just beat my opponents, or I have crazy combos, I'll just beat my opponents. Like it seems that way for me.
If anything, I've seen that certain cards have lost some value. Like specifically, let's say Bog Creeper, right? That's just a specific example that before you could just say, well, I'm just gonna throw up this Bog, and my opponent's gonna have to do some awkward trades, and I'm gonna get back in the game. Now, you play Bog, and then, the Dead Speaker, one of their guys, trades into your Bog, and you didn't quite get the board. So for me, if anything, it's shifted more towards grabbing the board earlier. It doesn't really matter that much, how much fancy late game I have if I don't have the board. Like with Druid, like people go off on UI, and they should. It's a really, really stupid card, right? But if you have UI in your hand and your opponent has a Scalebane and Contested on the board, guess what? You're not going to make it to turn 10, right? You're just going to die. So I've just been focusing way more on that, just really strong quality early game. And then obviously, I'm going to pick every Scalebane and Bone Mare I see. But I think when it comes to pure value, right, if you think of, card generation and this and that, I've just been shying away from that. Like if I'm Druid and I see a Nourish, I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't do much for my board. Maybe if you have like 2 UIs, you want to ramp into your UIs.
I have used Nourish to ramp into UI so many freaking times.
Yeah, right. That can work, but overall, I've just kind of shied away from these like more value cards. And it's just about board, tempo, and then you'll pick your bombs, right? You'll pick your really strong cards, and that'll just mean you win the game. Like just get the board and you'll get there.
Yeah, I think there's so when you say you're picking more curve cards, are you going for curve by making sure you have like solid 2, 3, 4s? Are you mentioned that 3-drops are particularly important, which we agree with. Our tier list has raised 3-drops more than other curve cards in when KFT came out. What number are you looking for before you feel like solid on 3s, or are you adding like a decent number of 1-drops to try to say, hey, look, the curve starts on 1. If other people are, especially these days, right? Some people like don't even curve out on 2. Especially if that's happening, that having a 1, I'm like really on the board, or is that committing too much? You're actually losing out on like the mid game, because with KFT, right, you're using the board, so you're buffing stuff on the board, which means you still need to, like, it's not totally aggro. You can't you can't just put everything on 1, 2, 3 and then kill your opponents. You still have the Ungoral taunts in place, like Tar Creeper you mentioned. And when you're buffing things on the board, a lot of the buffs require you to make trades to protect something, like the Scalebane, for example, or like Death Speaker requires you to hit into another minion on that turn to get value. So what's the balance of quote unquote going for curve? Like, at what point are you satisfied with your curve? I just want to use Druid as an example because it's a pretty normal class. So we're not talking about like Hunter or something, right? Like Druid.
Druid's fairly specific though, because it does depend on, do I have UI or not, which is a little funny, because if you have UI, you can take a bit more of a defensive stance, and you can like if you're playing Druid, it also depends, like, do I have Spreading Plague or not? Do I have Starfall or not? But most of the time, I'm just saying, like, all right, let's just not die, because Druid on average has, like, let's say you have a UI, not 2 UIs, but you just have a UI. You get to keep that in your opening hand most of the time if you draft really good curve. And then it's just about, okay, do I survive? Like, do I not fall behind? Then I'll just automatically win. Like, if I have a 1-drop, a 2-drop, like, let's say it's on coin, right? I have a 1-drop, a 2-drop UI and X, I'll just keep 1, 2 UI. And then, you just follow your curve and win. I like to, it's a bit funny, but you just call turns 1 till 9 the mini game. It's like, all right, let's just survive this mini game, and then turn 10 comes and I just win the match. So Druid might not be the best example. It's for me, it's for 3s. I'll take 6 premium 3s if I can get them, right? But 5 is usually the number where I'm satisfied with. If I can get 5 things, I'm happy playing on turn 3. That's good for me. 2-drops, funny enough, I actually haven't been getting that many. I'm not sure if it's a coincidence or if I'm just not really requiring them. I think maybe it's a good idea to bring up the Kalaset right now, right? Because I've had
do that.
Yeah, I've had 3 Kalaset decks in a row where we just said, okay, let's just go for it. Let's just be that guy and just say, nope, no matter what 2-mana card comes across my path, I will not pick it, right? So, like, you see inequality, you're like, nope. Dark Conviction, nope. We don't need 2s. I picked anything you could play on 1, like Emerald Reaver, obviously Righteous Protector if you can. And those decks just went 12, 12, and 9. It was a Mage and 2 Paladins. And I said, wow, this is pretty crazy, because this kind of goes against everything I believe in.
Yeah,
right?
And if you're wondering what Kalaset is, because if you're an arena player, you may not know what Kalaset is. And I had to look it up again to see what exactly it does. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with the battle cry that says, if your deck has no 2-cost cards, give all minions in your deck +1/+1. So it's insanely powerful, but you can't take 2-cost cards in your deck, and you have to draw it, of course.
Yeah. So I think this is interesting. Out of those 3 runs, 2 were Paladin, right?
Yes.
Paladin is the one class in which I'm just like, wow, like, you are actually able to get away with having a single 2-drop and then just being able to hero power. So during the draft, did you like target like 1-drops? Did you like go down in value to draft some 1s, or were they just like, did you sort of just like fall into them? Because I can't imagine you'd be able to do this with like no 1s and just like a single 2, right?
So the list I just had, right, went 9 wins, because that one was like pretty much right before I came on here. We had 2 Acaris Veterans, a Hive Queen, an Emerald Reaver, and a Lost in the Jungle. So the Hive Queen and the Emerald Reaver were cards that maybe you'd go like, well, not really. But because of the Kalaset, I'm like, all right, let's pick it. It's funny enough that one game I actually played the Hive Queen, and then the next draw was Kalaset. I was like, no, I can't play that curve. But it's just a funny anecdote. And then just like really strong 3s. And the reason I brought that up as well, the Kalaset decks, is because I've had it in a lot of my drafts where I have maybe 3 decent 2-drops. But it seems like the formula that's working for me is I'm just trying to get a couple good 1s, and if I can't get any 1s, I think it's important that you do have those 2s. But it seems to be like either 1s or 2s, but 3s are constant. Like good 3s, good 4s, good 5s, and then just like either bunch of good ones or enough good twos. But it doesn't feel like I need like, 3 to 4 good ones and then 6 twos, where, if we think back to GVG, it was more like that, where you're like, okay, I kind of want 3 or 4 ones and a minimum of 6 twos. It seems like the twos are not as important right now.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point where I'm okay if I have 5 1+2s. Like either 1 or 2 drops. I have 5, I'm good at a bare minimum for most classes. 6, and I'm happy. Like anything more than that, they'll have to be like, it's a premium 2, I'll take it. It's a premium 1, I'll take it. But it used to be, even I want to say even in like MSG, you don't even have to go back to as far back as GVG, where I wouldn't be as comfortable with that. Like in MSG, I would want a little bit more 2s, and I think that's interesting to me, because we all, like, everybody agrees, everyone says it, KFT is about buffing stuff on the board, right? Very easy with all the neutral cards for KFT Arena. But when you talk to people about how they draft and how they find success, there's not that much actually of an emphasis on the early part of the curve, like the 1s and 2s that you see this emphasis on in previous metas in which we thought curve was important. Instead, the focus is usually placed on 3 drops, which, if you were to tell me this, back in the GVG days, I would have thought that was ridiculous. Like 3 drops, or especially in Classic, right? Like 3 drops were the bastard child of the curve, right? Like you needed it, but like 2s were good enough and you were fine with it. You even go not even too far back, but even in like Ungoro or like 7.1, and you realize, oh, everything's 3/3 on 3. So your Raptors are going to take care of your 3 drops. You can just get more Raptors and you're fine. So something has changed in KFT that makes the idea of a premium 3 drop just really powerful when it comes to establishing your curve.
Yeah, maybe it's the fact that other people are just not landing 1 and 2. I think maybe it comes more from that there. Whereas if you have an average arena draft, you're not going to have a curve that always lands 1 into 2 into 3, right? So I think part of it might be that because other people aren't landing 1 into 2 every time, it's more like, okay, I just want consistency, because if I'm going to try it, I'm going to fail. I'm not always going to go 1 into 2, but I can consistently get that 3. That, with the combination of Frost Rider, Death Speaker, Tar Creeper, right? Just like really, really strong 3s. That might just be the case that we focus more on that now, and it has more success than just trying to force it. Because I recently had a Hunter deck go 12, and it did have just proper 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s. But I think that's more like the exception rather than the rule. Getting a deck that curves out so nicely.
Yeah,
so I think that's more why we're
I've definitely noticed this. Like whenever I've tried to play a non-Hunter deck or a non-Hunter sort of style of deck, and I try to get the what I think is the appropriate amount of 1s and 2 drops, what I found is even though I'm on the board, and even when they miss their 2 drop, it's so easy for them to negate my early advantage now. Like it's so easy for them to either to drop the Tar Creeper or Hildnir Frost Rider, completely dominate my 2 drop, or it's easy for that to get some face damage in, but then get swept up in an AoE starting from turn 5 or something, right? And then I feel as if the advantage I should be getting, or my perceived advantage of getting a 2 drop and them having missed a 2 drop, just isn't that strong. And recently, I just played the Shaman deck on stream, in which I basically had no 2 drops, but I had removals, right? I was like, okay, I have the Emerald Hive Queen, I have removals, I'll totem, and then I will get carried by just my big beefy taunts, my value cards, my draws, and sometimes I would just take some damage and then I would flip it, right, with a Lightning Storm or something. I'm just like, oh, that's what happened to me when I drafted 2s, right?
Yeah.
Of course I had a Hildnir Frost Rider, and so many times they'd be like, ha, I have a friendly bartender. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna totem and then I'm gonna play this 4/4.
And then I 2-for-1 you, and I'm even on the board with you. So it's the power of these new 3s that are added. I think Hildnir Frost Rider probably changed, and even if you look at Eggnapper from Ungoro, they're very much they're curve changers, which if you have it, the shape of your curve just kind of looks very different than normal. And they go a step above what we used to have, right? They're not like, I think Scarlet Crusader was probably the biggest curve changer from earlier on that we still have around, but now all of a sudden we've increased the chances of getting those types of cards by a lot, and they're not as vulnerable to pings. Okay, so it's just, I'm very interested in all these subtle like areas on how KFT changes things, because I think we all feel it. As soon as KFT hit, even if you take out the Death Knights, you take out the Bone Mares, the Cobalt Scalebanes, like even if they don't exist, the whole feel of the game, like just on neutral cards wise, especially because there's not that many like great class cards in the set, it just feels very different than Un'Goro. And like we were talking about this earlier, Shady, and you said that you actually like Un'Goro a bit better, and I had like the exact opposite reaction where I absolutely hated Un'Goro, and I thought like KFT really brought things back to like where I was comfortable. So what's the biggest change, and what's causing, like, why do you think Un'Goro was the better or more fun or meta for you?
So I think a big part of that is you play all classes evenly, right? So
where I did until KFT, because Warrior sad.
I'm really bad now. But in Un'Goro, I agree that class balance was bad. It was just bad, right? You had to, like, before they did the weapon change, you had to play Rogue, Mage, Paladin, and then maybe Hunter, maybe Shaman was okay, right? But if you wanted to compete, it was those three. And then after they did the nerf or the buff to weapons, it was basically just Paladin, right? So, but I think pre-patch, like the first 2 months of Un'Goro, I really enjoyed, because if you were okay with picking one of those three classes, you had such a big say in the matter, and I thought you could do really well and get some ridiculous averages. Back when Rogue was getting their Vol Spines, when Mage was getting Meteors, sure, like the decks were really strong and really powerful, but because you could have these effects out of hand, you could really, I feel like you could draft with a specific game plan in mind, and you rarely just lost because your opponent's deck was nuts, or because you had a bad start, this or that. I feel like a lot of the time I had really good control over the game, and I could usually pinpoint, like, okay, here is where I got a little greedy here. I feel like a lot of the time there's more value off, where you needed to be like the way how I usually describe this is when you are trying to outvalue your opponent, you're trying to be a tiny bit slower than him, where you burn a little bit less gas than him, but not enough that he gets the jump on you, not enough that he overpowers you on the board, but you just let him kind of run out of steam. You're like, okay, you can attack me, that's fine. I'm just going to be one step behind you, but I'm never in danger of completely losing the board. And that just doesn't happen right now. It's like, oh, you're like 1 minion down. All right, I get that speakered. Okay, now he plays Scalebane. Okay, now if I don't have a Meteor or whatever, I can concede because the game is over. So in that regard, I really enjoyed Un'Goro, that a lot of the times I could see that my opponents didn't see that game plan. They didn't see what they had to do. And then I won because I felt like I played better than them. And right now I feel like the game plan is so painfully obvious that when they have the tools in their hand to go like, oh, me play green card again. It's like, okay. Right? And then occasionally one of those green cards is a Death Knight, and it gets very funny. So in that regard, I really enjoyed Un'Goro. But I do agree that class balance wise, we're doing a lot better right now. But that's mainly because you just have really, really good neutrals.
I mean,
I personally don't.
It's totally true. I mean, besides the class balance thing, even just what you were talking about, like you have like these win conditions and this ability that had never happened before when Un'Goro came out to build different types of decks with different ways to win. And it was very different for each class, and it was very different for each, depending on what cards you got, and you could play in different ways. Whereas KFT, like we were talking about, right, it's all conformed. You put cards on the board, you get one up, you have the card that buffs it, you get a really huge advantage. There's a lot less removals, and you kind of just win on that. And I think that's actually like what you're seeing as like a feature of Ungoro, and a you know like a kind of very that becomes very obvious and very one dimensional in KFT. I'm viewing from the reverse side as like, oh, I like this, because Ungoro was kind of all over the place for me, where every single opponent you see, you can't really guess what their win condition was, because you don't know which particular like card or like 2 or 3 series of cards they're going to try to rely on to establish their identity and win. It was very hard to kind of like play defense for me in Ungoro, whether I had the board or I didn't have the board. Whereas in KFT, it's very obvious. It's painfully obvious what you have to do. And so all I have to do is do that. So it is definitely more one-dimensional, but I enjoy that more, and I feel more in control, even though you have like less cards with initiative, which usually makes you feel less control. But because your direction is so clear, like you know what you have to do to be able to get the control, which is to be on the board, and then you can just go ahead and try to do that. And that's, I don't know, maybe it's comforting to me because that's how most metas in Hearthstone have been in the arena. And Ungoro was kind of more the exception than the rule. And also, it just helps better players, I think, to be on the board. Like, if you're rewarding things on the board, because usually better players are on the board more often. So if your big swing cards are Bone Mare, right, rather than Primordial Drake, yes, they both hugely swing the game, and you're probably going to win if you hit a good one. But one rewards you for being off the board, which is good if you're like planning to be off the board and you're like really like, you know, drafted your deck that way, played that way, like kind of like baiting your opponent. But it also works if you kind of just suck and you're getting defeated on the board because of your like bad trades or bad minions. And then you play Primordial Drake and you still have a good shot of winning. Whereas Bone Mare, you could just luck into it by being on the board, but usually you have to have some amount of skill to be on the board by turn 7. Like, this is not like, oh, I'm on the board by turn 4, like let's say a Blessing of Kings, in which case it's usually not. It's usually kind of like randomly determined based on what cards you have in your deck and what cards you draw, whether you end up being able to Blessing of Kings something or not. But with Bone Mare, it's turn 7. At that point, it's almost like the reverse Flame Strike thing, right? Where you could already usually, like the mass majority of the times, have gotten some kind of setup in some way where your skill has affected, you know, what minions are like on the board at that point.
See, I think that is true to some extent. Well, I mean, it's just a true statement, period, of like the better players will have the board more often. But I understand what Shady is saying. Like, I remember when I was playing in Ungoro, and comparing that to how I feel in the games now, like I felt like my reads and my knowledge of like the game pace mattered a little bit more in Ungoro. I certainly do also agree that it was frustrating, like, you know, when they did have like the AoE clear after initiative. But I did feel as if like that was something I could exercise a little bit more, sort of like I understand the pacing of this game a little bit better than my opponent. Like I have better reads on my opponent. And right now it's just sort of like we both understand what the pace is. It's like, let's Bone Mare each other. Right? So
initiate attempt to Bone Mare. Turn 1. Turn 2.
But I remember in Ungoro, there was this one, there was this run in which it was like this priest essentially drew like 2 extra cards starting at turn 5. I'm like, okay, we're gonna go into fatigue now, you know. But it was just this like I understood the pace, I understood what was gonna happen, and you didn't have these like really snowbally minion based stuff. So even if they like cleared you, you know, they weren't gonna kill me the next turn, right? Yeah. So like so even if they cleared me, I was like, quote, okay, because they weren't going to kill me immediately, so I could, you know, take some time to build up, respond, and everything. So I did enjoy that. Yeah, you know, the more I think about it, the more I do see sort of like both sides, right? Like what I enjoyed about Ungoro, what I enjoy about KFT, and yes, the better player does sort of get the board more often. But by now, I am kind of bored of just like, wow, I see the game plan. It is a very familiar game plan here, and my opponent has the same game plan. Yay.
I mean, if you don't care about the fun, it's a great meta. That's all I'm saying.
I would say, and you can disagree with this, right? But I think that what you say is perfectly true. The better player does benefit from the board, absolutely, right? If the game is played only on the board, but I think only to a certain extent, right? I think there is I think you reach the cap earlier when the game is played that way than when the game is played more off the board. Like I feel because of how like more you need to understand. Like I think part of why I enjoyed Agora as well is because I just spam, right? And I played so many games, and I felt like it really took me a long time to really, really get it. I needed this specific game plan for each class versus each class. And I feel like there were way more opportunities for my opponent to screw up in there that, yes, the better player absolutely benefits, you know, from a game of who is on the board wins. But I think like if we want to put it in average, I think your average, if you fully understand this meta, is going to be lower than when, you know, you are fully into a meta that's like played a bit more off the board. Now, I might be wrong in that, but that's at least how it feels to me. Because my average is fine. Like what do I have right now? 7.7 or 7.77. Yeah, which is, you know, over 133 runs. That's not bad. But in Ungoro, I was averaging 8+, and it just feels like I had more. Like I could do more, right? Like I could study more. I could, especially the drafting. I feel like the drafting is so everyone's doing the same thing, and in Ungoro it was like, okay, rogues gonna draft it this way, hunter gonna draft it this way, mage gonna draft it. It was all like very specific, and I had to keep track of, okay, what am I facing? How can I adjust that? So yeah, maybe I'm just a fanboy because I know a lot of people really dislike Ungoro, and they're like, ugh, hate arena.
No, Shady. As someone who got the #1 ranking during Ungoro, I will agree that it was definitely the most skill intensive.
Yeah, really
skill intensive. Not like, you know, Dread with this simple KLT. Come on.
You only got to.
I could definitely, like, when it comes to Ungoro, it always felt like when you're drafting a class, you're building the class. It's almost like you're in an RPG and you're building a hero and you're doing your things and you're taking advantage of what you have. And in KFT, it really feels like you're building whatever you are building like a normal person that, you know, like a hero that hits someone with a club. And then you get to modify your club, and whether it deals electricity or it swings a little faster or whatever, rather than creating like a whole new class in Ungoro. I definitely agree with that. I think, yeah, I mean, it's just the difference of kind of what you prefer, right? Like there is definitely more depth and more frustration with Ungoro, because the depth kind of brings the frustration, and there's part of it that I feel is just inaccessible. So while the most accessible, it's normal, like game, like when you're designing a game, right? If you create more things that cannot be seen, you create more frustration. But at the same time, the reason we're playing this instead of like chess is because that's also more fun, and we feel like there's a different element of skill involved in reading the unknown. So yeah, the difference between Ungoro and KFT, at least that one major dimension of it, is how deep you want to go into that, like how comfortable you are going deeper into that versus trying to control for it. I always feel like, especially with a game like Hearthstone and Arena, it's already so uncontrollable that I try to do everything I can to like corral everything into a comfort zone to win the games. That when things go even more off, and I think one of the things that makes Ungoro really uncomfortable for me was that things, like you said, when things go off, right? When your opponent has a particular game plan or a series of cards or whatever, you can do something to prevent it, but it's really hard to figure out what. And like Burp said, right? Like you can kind of improve on it. You can feel like what you're doing really matters, and that's almost more frustrating to me. Because in KFT, when your opponent does something like play a Death Knight, right? That's one of the big swing things, whereas Ungoro would be like 2 board clears, for example. But when a Death Knight comes out, you know exactly what you need to do. Like if you're a good player who knows how to play Death Knight, you hit your opponent to the face a lot as fast as you can. Like you measure the number of turns until you can't do that anymore and you will lose the game. And you throw everything you have on it because the Death Knight is going to win the long game. When it comes to Ungoro, they do the first board clear. Now you're wondering, okay, do they have a second board clear? What are the odds they have the second board clear? If they have the second board clear, can I win? If I can't win, what do I play? If I can win, what do I play? If I'm playing around an Envenom weapon, do I also play around the Assassinate? How many just how many hard removals a rogue has? Because they could really have like 6 reasonably in Ungoro. And it becomes a much deeper analysis, but also a much more, like, a less controllable analysis, where you're fighting more among the, I think, like 45-55% reads, rather than the, I kind of know what I need to do, let me just try to do that really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go on this for like another 2 hours or so. So we should probably move on for like the Ungoro meta, because like, yeah, I play like, it's like what you say is true, but I think that if you, it's more like when you have like a standard deck, right? Where you're just like, okay, I'm going to curve out, because a standard game plan against, you know, like the mage that's going to board clear is super frustrating because they have too much. But it's more like, okay, that's not going to work, then how am I going to play it? That's why, for instance, like in Rogue, I was like, okay, Assassin's Blade is suddenly like pretty decent. Why? Because he's going to keep me off the board. But this thing can go 12 face while I, you know, Val finds his taunt out of the way. So that's like very specific things that, and that's why, but I'm probably more like outnumbered in that department, that I really enjoyed when those very specific things matter, right? When the like when everyone's complaining, like Fireland's Portal meta. I enjoyed that meta.
You enjoyed that meta? Like, actually enjoyed it?
Okay. And why did we invite you to say that?
Sorry, okay, at the risk of never ever being invited. Here's why. While everybody is whining and bitching and just saying, oh man, it's too strong, I'm just like, okay, what specific things can I do, right? And it's just like these little things. Okay, I'm going to put a 1 HP minion on the board on turn 7. And then you can choose Ping or Portal. I'm going to make sure I always, you know, I'm going to play my 2 of my 3 on turn 5. I'm going to save my Spiteful Smith into turn 7. There's all these little things that I could do to really affect the game. And I don't, I like it less when things are more standard. I like it more when there's these specific things that I can do when most people are too busy complaining. I'm like, yeah, Fireland's Portal is so bad. It's like, wow, how's the average so high? Oh man, I'm just getting really lucky. I don't know, man. It's supposed to be something I'm doing on turn 7, right? So
yeah, I mean, we were all about you know, playing with the Fireland's Portal when that first came out, and had all these strategies, these little things you can do to beat it, because at that point it was like mostly mages. Like literally more than half of your matchups were against mages, and they all have so many Fireland's Portals. But I wouldn't call it enjoyable. At no part, I think that's the difference. Because at no part of that,
I'm weird with that.
Okay, so that's that brought us all the way back to Ungoro. Let's talk about how, like, getting away from how to best succeed in the game and getting to where the game is actually going. Because we last had you on in February, pre 7.1. I remember talking a little bit about how we wanted 7.1 to look, what it could mean for the future of Arena, and then since then Blizzard has really kind of dug in. They have gone in with 7.1 changes, they made some other changes in the middle, then they started the synergy picks thing, and we don't know what's happening next, but synergy picks are going away with the next patch, as well as Vicious Fledgling, and they may or may not also try something else. So how do you feel Blizzard has been handling it in the past 6 months? Which parts of it have you liked, disliked, and what do you see for the future? Open floor.
All right. Okay, so because, you know, I really enjoyed Ungoro, I enjoyed when they did the spell modifier. I enjoyed that we got more reactive cards and the game was less Curvestone. Even though, you know, Curvestone can be fun, especially when you're playing Hunter, just like, 1, 2, 3, hit him in the face. I feel like the game becomes, we talked at length about it, right? I like it when the game becomes a bit more.
I'm going to interrupt the answer to my own question and put a second question, because I think this is, like, I really want to know the answer to this.
Sure.
Which meta did you like better? Ungoro Part 1 or Ungoro Part 2, after the weapons bonus came in, the Ungoro bonus went out, and like micro adjustments went in?
Oh, Part 1.
Part 1? Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious after the last discussion.
Yeah, no way. Because the thing with like the change, right? It's you just made it more about, okay, now there's not that many boss spines. There's not that many meteors.
Okay.
And now it's more like, well, are you gonna get lucky? are you the one that gets spawned? Because the power spike was huge, right? The jump from non-Angora cards to Angora cards. We all saw this. It was like, wow, these cards are crazy. If you're going to dilute that, you're going to make it more about, oh, hey, you're the lucky guy that got a lot of Angora cards and your opponent didn't. You know, enjoy, right? It's going to be a fun game for you, not so much for him. So I think I really hate it when they start tinkering with the offering rates. So, you know, it has to be said though, like a lot of people always go like, oh, Blizzard this, Blizzard that. I think that, you know, I really enjoy playing their game, and I'm very grateful I can play card games, you know, in a limited format versus other people online at basically any hour I want, right? That's amazing. But it's like they do certain things really well. And then, for instance, the tinkering with the offering rates and just saying like, okay, we are going to balance classes, like from at least from my limited understanding, right? They're saying we're going to see which cards do well, and then we're going to offer them less, right? For classes that do well. And then for classes that don't do so well, cards that do well, we're going to offer them more. And that way we hope that, you know, somehow the classes go more towards like a 50% win rate. I really don't like that. I think that part of being good at this game is just feeling at, okay, how exactly does this meta work? And then adjust, right? If the meta is constantly shifting because they're like, oh, we're going to do a little bit less polymorph here and a bit more there, and then these classes become strong, I think you take a lot of the identity away and you make it more like, okay, let's just go through the motions, right? It's more about, you know, just get lucky in your draft and, you know, like play reasonably well. I enjoy it much more that, you know, you have to really understand the meta and you have a solid grasp and you know how often things are going to appear, rather than, well, you know, I see it this often now, but it's a good card, it's probably going to appear less, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and look, we've talked about this on the Lightforge previously. Like, look, I hate the micro adjustments because I think the people that it affects the most are people like us, right? Like the people who are really trying to min-max everything, right? Really trying to figure out the meta, to squeeze out those extra wins at high win rates. And it has created an impossible situation, right? Where I don't know when they are going to update, because it's not like by the second. It's not like, you know, every single second there's a different offering rate, or at least I hope not. I don't know. And I have no idea what the win rate is, or not the win rate. I have no idea what the offering rate is. And it's also, like you said, it's not just like a nerfed card in which the standard deviation is, you know, very small in terms of its effect. The effect is still there. You just don't know when you're going to get hit with it, right? Like you're just going to get hit with the Vile Spine. You're going to lose the game, but you're just like, well, I don't know how, like what the probability is anymore. Like, or at least I don't know what the probability is for this week, you know, when they change it next week as well. Maybe Rogue just like tanks. So then they'll raise Vile Spine's offering rate. But it's really unfortunate. Like at this point, I guess I've sort of accepted. I'm like, maybe it's just better for the game because it's better for the casual crowd. I can't, I don't know. I can't accept that argument. I'm wondering if like you think there's any validity to it. It's like, well, this sucks for us, but it's just good for the game and the casuals in general.
I think in a way, and I said this before, right? It's more the community's fault, and it's weird, right? Yeah, but yeah, and I've never understood why, right? But there's always this like outcry. It's like, we need more class balance. We need more class balance. We need more. Like it's like they act like it's super important, and then when you know, KFT is pretty good for class balancing, if you ask me, right?
Yeah,
it's like yeah. I mean, sure, Warrior sucks, Shaman sucks. The others are, you know, fine-ish. Priest, Hunter, not so much. We have 5 classes that are pretty close together, right? Which is, I'm not sure when the last time was. Maybe MSG.
MSG,
or so.
Yeah. This is the best class balance since MSG.
Yeah. So I don't really care too much about class balance. I want to feel like my decisions as a player matter, and it doesn't matter which class I have to play for that. If Hunter's good, it's a bonus for me, but I'm not going to lie, and have a preference for Hunter, but I I will enjoy playing whichever class, as long as it's more like I consider it as a vehicle to kind of display my knowledge of the game, my skill, and my ability to predict cards and et cetera, et cetera. And if people are just going to keep sending that signal to Blizzard, like, oh, we care about this class balance, then of course you push them towards doing this, where we say, well, if you guys just care about that 50% win rate, then why don't we just artificially, make it so that Rogue gets a lot more shitty cards, Mage gets a lot more shitty cards, and then, in an ideal world, Warrior would get, a ton of really good cards, and it would get pushed towards each other, towards 50% win rate. So in a way, you can't really blame Blizzard that they respond with it. But yeah, obviously, personally, I'm like, yeah, I really don't like that. I like it much more when there's a bit more chaos and not everything is so uniform. I would just say, okay, we're just going to push everything as close together. In a way, they did this with World of Warcraft as well, right? We just said, okay, every class can do everything now. No one can complain, right? But then you lose that identity and you lose like more your effect on the game as a player, I feel.
Yeah.
And it's more like the game plays you rather than you're playing the game. You're just waiting until it's your turn to get the good neutrals, etc.
Yeah, at this point, I just feel like swept up in a riptide. I have no idea sort of where it's taking me next. It's like synergies, more spells, more weapons, micro adjustments, and I just really do not know. And I said this previously, like on Lightforge, I think just last week. Oh gosh. But
Merps, quoting Merps.
I know, but I am actually like fearful or like anxious for the next change. I'm just like, I don't want to know what the next change is. I'm like, it's not going to be good. I think, like, based on the history of this, their changes this year, it's not something I'm going to look forward to, and it's something I'll have to adjust. Or if it's something like the micro changes, it's something I can adjust to, and that's it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, as you brought up before, just to play the devil's advocate on Blizzard's side, maybe this change is like, why should this change be good for you? Why should this change not be good for the casuals that make up, I don't know, 99% of Blizzard's arena player base, and favor you, the 1%? If you talk to like just micro adjustments by itself, if you are a casual player, there is nothing wrong with micro adjustments at all. It can only help, right? It means I can play the class that I want, be it, I mean, it's not working right now, but in theory, if it worked, I could pick Warrior and I would just end up in a decent spot in the arena generally, without the necessary conforming effects that, because when Shady was talking about conforming effects, that's more KFT and the like pool of cards that came in. That's not so much like what micro adjustments have done. Because micro adjustments give you more the like weird class cards that your class has that's super powerful, and like reduces the class cards that are like super bad for the most part. So if I'm a casual player, this is only going to help me, and this is going to help me in my experience in the arena too, because I'm going to see more diversity of classes, which is probably cool and fun for me. I don't know. Again, I'm trying to step in the shoes of someone that I'm definitely not. So why should, and Shady was saying this, the community like outcries on things like class balance. Like, Blizzard is solving the problem, and you may think that you are the problem, but you are clearly not the problem they're solving for. You're clearly the acceptable collateral, like damage, right? That is necessary to solve the actual problem, which is people not having enough fun in the arena, and people thinking arena's unbalanced somehow. So we create classes all equally win ratey, but for the average player, we create synergies because people like more synergies. I mean, they screwed up on the implementation, but you see the idea, right? Like,
yeah. I know what you mean, and I'll answer this first, and then because I've thought about this way too much. But here's the way I look at it: like, whenever there is some sort of game, there is some sort of progression, right? There's some sort of path. And we always see, like, even players that are sort of like casual, at a certain point, like a lot of the player base, they need to be able to see that there is an end game of some sort, right? Like they even if they don't reach the end game, I think a lot of players appreciate. It's like, all right, what is my progression path, right? Like eventually. And I think that like, so if you look at this game and you're like, oh, cool. So the first step is to memorize the cards. Second step is to like, you know, figure out trades on the board. After that, it's to, you know, get better reads, blah, blah, blah. And then like, if you look at a game and the last step is either so complex and convoluted that, you know, it's hidden behind, you know, micro adjustments, and also the end game, like the very end of the game, right? Like when you're competing for the leaderboards and you're competing for a top spot, or, you know, you just want to go super infinite, like that is, you know, getting pulled in every direction from, you know, the synergy picks and increase to this, decrease to that. This card isn't available anymore. This is available at 50%. I think it just like really dissuades people from playing more than a casual level, right? I think so. It's okay if you're the guy who like plays an arena every 2 weeks, right? You're like, I'll play this every, you know, like I'll draft and then I'll finish this. But I think it prevents a lot of people from taking the next step because they see what the last step is and they're just like, wow. It's like, look at Shady checking out the HS replay stats and like pouring over. It's like, oh man, Valspine is down 5% this week. No need to play around Valspine.
Bring out the big boys.
Yeah, like it's like, wow, it's like this crazy person is just like analyzing HS replay stats and it's like, oh man, Wasp is up 2%, you know, Valspine is down. It's like, oh, Bog Creeper is down, bring out the hunt. Like that just seems so unfun, right? It's no longer a self-contained game. You have to do all this weird extracurricular stuff, and then he sees Shady, you know, spending all this stuff. Shady, I'm projecting a lot of stuff onto you, right?
All Shady's like, of course I'm gonna do that. What?
And then they're like, it's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do what this crazy arena streamer does, right? And then I think it dissuades a lot of people, and then everyone just like plays super casually. And then whenever you have a game in which everyone sort of plays casually and there's no one sort of reaching towards the end game, that is a dying game, I think, right? Like you need sort of the middle, you know, you need the plebs, you need the middle class, and you also need a very, very sort of like obsessive, aspiring sort of like, you know, elite sort of player base who want to keep on getting better. And it really cuts off, I think, the main player base from trying to get there when they see everything as like, there's no way for me to figure this out unless I want to pour over the stats. So I guess I'm just not going to try.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think also Adok is right. And here's the thing, right? I think you're right, as in it's going to dissuade people from trying. But I think a lot of the people that, I know in general, Blizzard wants to be playing Arena, and I might be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong with this, but more like consider it as a game mode where they can just play it to get, you know, a bit of extra value. So like they're not necessarily playing Arena because they want to have a really high average. It's more like I kind of want to play Arena and I want to do decent-ish to like earn a pack and not lose too much money and then gain a little bit of gold to more like support their collection. And that's kind of the sad and dangerous, you know, part where Adok is right. Like if you're more someone who just goes in the arena and does not want to get as high an average as possible, just wants to, you know, have a bit of fun and not lose too much in the process, and sometimes, you know, get some value or win some gold, this is perfect for you, right? What they're doing. It's like make it easier to understand, make everything a bit more the same. Death Knights, like I talked about this as well, because people and people must ask you this all the time as well. Burps, Adok, what do you think? Death Knight, should it be an arena? Should it not be an arena? Right? Must be a super common question. And my answer is always that, you know, from a personal, like selfish point of view, of course not. They shouldn't be an arena. They're too strong, right? The difference between someone having a Death Knight and someone not having Death Knight, like you're not more skilled because you were able to click on the Death Knight portrait in the draft, right? But it definitely translates that way in the game, right? If it's an even game and you slam Jaina, you have effectively won the game, right? If the other person isn't far enough ahead, you can just out control them no matter what.
This is Shady saying my leaderboard strategy in October takes no skill. I don't know if I can take this.
You just go all Death Knights, right? Yeah, but I mean, you should, man. You should.
High roll Death Knights.
But from a more, making the game more fun for everyone and making the game more memorable, Death Knights are amazing, because that's going to keep people coming back to doing it. So, that one time where I had that death, oh man, that was so much fun, and I kicked so much butt, right? So, well, like the devil's advocate point of view, it's correct, right? That's how they, and Blizzard is obviously, it's a successful company. They know what they're doing when it comes to how can we make our game more, enjoyable for most people. So yeah, I think you guys are both right, and I think there's just not that many people percent-wise that are aiming for the top. So even if the end game becomes a bit more meh, like Merp says, right, where you just have to more compare stats, I don't think enough people are going to care for Blizzard to suddenly make a 180 and say, all right, we're going back to River Crocs and Yetis, because that's required more skill, and we're not gonna make these super flashy cards where it's more about who drafts and wins the game. Yeah,
I think I agree that that's where the direction is going, and that it's kind of necessary. What I think, and this is, I don't know, maybe I just don't know enough about how to balance a game that I think it's doable and it's actually not. But I always think there's a good way to do something and a lazy way to do something. And the good way is going to be very difficult. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of intelligence, and it's going to take a lot of resources. And the bad way is going to take some of that, but not, to the same degree. So if the goal is something like balance all the classes because people are going to keep complaining at us if it's not exactly 50%. We could, actually just micro adjust everything. It's automatic. It's going to get us 50%. Or we could do something where we're actually preserving the identity of the classes and pushing things that they're stronger in and weaker in, and not creating something like to really feel for the game when we're doing these decisions and balance, right? If you look at most balancing that they do, including the balancings that they do for Constructed, that's how it's done. They don't do it very often. They really take care to see what changes they make, and they try to make these changes, with a lot of thought and testing and care. And then there's what they do to the arena, which is they see a problem, they realize they have to solve it, and now, to their credit, in 2017, they've been trying to solve the problem. Before that, they've been ramping up to even begin trying to solve the problem. So they're at least doing stuff to try to solve the problem now, and to a certain extent they have solved some of the problems, but they're doing it in the lazy way. I think they've made very conscious decisions in the arena to do things the lazy way, either because arena's not worthy of the resources, or they don't have the brain power that it takes on the limited side to make these balances, or maybe because it's just more complicated to balance arena than it is Constructed, which I don't think is true. But at some point, I think they made this decision where the ways that they're going to use to balance arena and Constructed are going to be different. And the way that they're going to be using to balance the arena, I think, is generally more along the lazy way than the let's try to get this really, 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 really good and preserve all these other things to make the best game kind of way. So it goes to what Merps is saying, where he thinks there has to be this end game where everything has to be perfect or more or less perfect in a way that, players like him can really dig into. And maybe Blizzard's abandoning that. That's what I'm getting from all these kind of changes that have been happening this year, is maybe they don't think that that's necessary for the arena. They think it's necessary for Constructed, and maybe there doesn't need to be an end game or this, what you're calling the middle class. Maybe there could just be a bunch of plebs who are grinding arena or not grinding arena or playing it occasionally to get more packs, and that it's fun because their main game is Constructed, and they want people to play the arena, but they don't want people to play the arena too seriously, right? They're not abandoning the arena. They're abandoning the top part of the arena. in favor of, or not like, maybe not like totally abandoning, but they're definitely taking the interest of the quote-unquote plebs in the arena, which is what they hope to be probably like all or most constructed players also. And they're favoring that in a very heavy way. So maybe the entire model is just not what we want it to be, and that's just the reality that we're in, because, you know, Blizzard's a successful company, makes lots of money, especially on Hearthstone, and they are actively doing things to try to make Arena better, right? Like, no one thinks they're here fiddling around with the Arena when they don't have to, spending resources on the Arena when they don't have to, because they want to make things worse, and they want people to complain.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It certainly seems that they're taking it in that direction, right? Like, de-emphasis on whatever class of people that we want to define. And in that post by Ben Brode a while ago, I don't remember the exact language, but it seemed like he was saying, you know, we want to make the arena sort of like kind of wacky and crazy, right? Like, you know, a place where kind of cool, interesting stuff can happen, which is not exactly reassuring.
I mean, that just shouldn't be the goal, because it's already a place where weird and crazy things happen all the time. That's why we like the arena. You don't have to like make more of it. This is almost like I think it's almost like whenever you watch a TV show and they define certain characters of certain traits. Like, you know, Sheldon from Big Bang Theory is X, Y, and Z, and these are his traits. And like 3 seasons later, he's no longer a human being. He is just these freaking traits, and he's completely unrelatable as a character at that point. Whereas, you know, you would start off with more of a balanced kind of like character. And it happens with almost every TV show, because that's what makes them successful, is these things. That's what makes them unique. And your focus, and when you focus in on the things that make your product kind of unique at the expense of the more grounded aspects, I think you get a worse product. But it's done in it's not just a Hearthstone problem, is my point. Like, I feel like this is something that it just kind of happens, and right now Blizzard's doing it to Hearthstone Arena, and it's kind of negatively affecting us. But any final thoughts on the direction of the arena in the future, Shady?
I mean, as a player, I'll always just keep adapting. So like, just advice to other, you know, really, you know, motivated players that want to do really well is just look at the things. Like, Dretz is a good example, right? Like, he could say like, oh, you know, I really dislike this, or he could just say like, well, dragons seem to be working, so I'm gonna play some more Dragon Priest and take advantage of it. I don't love where they're taking it, but let's just, you know, assume that like they're going to get it right. Like, for instance, the synergies, the fact that they said we're gonna take it back, that to me is a step in a great direction. That they didn't just, you know, like put the blinders on and say, no, synergies are good. You guys know what you're talking about. We're gonna make it happen. So, a little fearful, but hopeful. I'll put it like that.
Yep. I think that's fine.
All right, cool. Do we have a question from the GOAT today, Merps?
No, we don't.
No question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT is brought to you by Patreon. Our Patreons at patreon.com/grinninggoat. Check it out if you haven't, and thank you to all of our Patreons. We will have 2 questions from the GOATs next week to make up for this. We're gonna end this. We were gonna talk about Druid a bit more of the class talk, but let's not do that. Let's just focus on card good bad to end this podcast. This is a card that Shady picked, and it was his first choice. I didn't even tell him what cards we've done before, and it's a very good one. We've been like circling around trying to like maybe talk about this card for a few weeks now. Keening Banshee, which is rated a 127 on our tier list, which means for a 4-mana card, it is literally the highest rated neutral 4-mana card in the entire game, and it is a KFT card. It is 4 mana, 5/5. Whenever you play a card, remove the top 3 cards of your deck. So, Shady, why did you want to talk about this card?
All right, so this is not exactly Foul Reaver, but it's a similar thing, right? Where the player that hasn't played with it yet, or that doesn't fully understand its effect, looks at this card and says, wow, this card is terrible. it destroys 3 of my cards every time I play something. And it's more that realization that, you know, if a card isn't in your hand yet, you didn't lose it, right? Like cards that get milled from your deck don't matter until you hit fatigue. Like literally until you hit fatigue, milling cards from your deck doesn't matter, because they may as well have been at the bottom of your deck and you wouldn't have drawn them that game, and they don't matter. So I just want to talk about this card because a little less now, because I just got it over and over and over again. I have a command for it in my chat as well. Every time someone says like, why do you pick Banshee so bad? We just have a Banshee command, which explains that 4-mana 5/5 is really good. Yetis are still really good, right? Mm-hmm. Well, a Yeti with 5 damage is a lot better. So yeah, there's no tempo downside. That's a big one. Like Ventrico Mercenary has a huge tempo downside, so it affects you on the board. It slows you down. Banshee doesn't do that. Banshee doesn't slow you down on the board. And a lot of the time, people will actively not kill your Banshee. It's like, no, I'm going to make him throw away more cards. You're like, all right, dude, 5 to the face, 5 to the face. And they'd be like, haha, you only have 3 cards left in your deck. And I'm dead. That's not the point. I nearly had you, right? It's funny. They don't realize that you could also say like, well, okay, I won't play a card then. It's fine. I can just hit you in the face again. It's pretty funny. I enjoy cards like that because they just do so much work and they are underappreciated, because we usually entertain the above average arena player, right? They find a way to our streams and they can appreciate the more in-depth explanation of the gameplay and stuff. And even in our chats, like this Banshee thing, it's asked a lot. So you can only imagine what, you know, the average player that doesn't bother watching the streams thinks of this card, and, you know, never picks it and stays away from it because, ugh, it destroys my card. It's terrible. Can't never pick it.
I am so annoyed at this point by everybody in every stream, every time that I have a Banshee, talking about this card and asking questions about it. Because, yes, I understand not everyone watches every stream, but it's been 2 months now, and every single time I pick a Banshee, there are still people who, you know, are like, hey, why'd you pick a Banshee? Isn't it the worst card? And then when they see a Banshee and it like starts milling my cards, like, oh my god, look how many cards it milled. I'm like, yeah, let's wait to see if any of that matters. But it's apparently very unintuitive that this kind of effect is not all that bad at all. Rather than most people who I think feel like intuitively feel that it's either on the scale of like bad to horrible.
Yeah. Look, this is just you can repeat this as many times as you want, but it's like unless people understand it, like really understand it, like the message won't get through, right? It's just cards that are not in your hand or cards that are in your deck. Like people feel as if cards in their deck are theirs. They are not your cards. You selected them to obtain them later, potentially. But
not if you have a Banshee. Not if you have a Banshee, it won't.
Right. But those are not your cards. Like they were never your cards. You never had them. You know, it's not like you're not like a squirrel who like grabbed nuts and then they are yours. You just have to like, you know, collect them. Like no. Like you never had those, right? Like you selected the option to get these things. That was it. I don't know why I just thought of squirrels. I'm not sure. Let's ignore that. But yeah, I think it just goes to the fact that for some reason, some people just still don't get the idea that those are not lost because you never had it. You can't lose what you never had. And that's it. That is the one thing. If you get that, you get it. If you don't get that, pick Keening Banshee still, please. Or don't. And lose, I guess, because it's a really good card.
Yeah, we keep mentioning how important curve is, right? And it's usually curve when you get to like some of the mid-range like part of the game that's the best. Well, Keening Banshee is really, really freaking good at getting you that like mid-game like presence on the board for the rest of your cards. So it's powerful. Now I'm gonna pose a question though, devil's advocate here. There are times in which Keening Banshee is not a good card for a deck. What times are those? At what point do you go from, yes, okay, so before our whole conversation was basically addressed towards the people who are like, is Keening Banshee really that good? Now let's address the conversation towards the people who have been listening to us this whole time, or who already know that Keening Banshee is the best thing ever. It is just the best card. You almost always take it. But, and I think we all agree on this, there are certain decks in which you don't want a Keening Banshee. What decks are those?
Sure. Okay. I mean, I think the most obvious example is when your deck just revolves around like a single win condition. We're talking about like you picked N'Zoth as your first card and you went all in on the Death Rattles. And you just need that N'Zoth to win. We're not saying it's a great deck, but however, that is like your win condition. You're just like, man, I cannot like basically if I don't get N'Zoth, my win percentage goes down dramatically, then it's kind of tough to pick Keening Banshee there. You can still do it, but that is one of those times you're just like, oh man, I'm really unsure about this, because then I'm just left with these like shallow grave diggers that, you know, don't do anything, right? So I think that's a good example of a time in which you wouldn't want to pick it.
I think a very specific example and very common is UI.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I find that if I have UI in my deck and Banshee, they don't really, like either, you know, milling the UI, sure. Chat's going to go like, lol, Banshee, good card, lol, right? But it's more that if you've had your Banshee effect, and then your UI is going to hit you into fatigue. That's more the thing that bothers me when I'm playing Banshee and Druids. So that's where I'd probably rate it slightly less, but only, you know, if you have one UI, sure, but especially when you have two UIs, it gets in the way for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a very like good, like clear example where it will, like, you will sometimes go into fatigue, and there are some decks that you build that will actually go into fatigue like a few games per run, and that's just, you know, that's just how it was built. And in those games, Banshee's pretty bad, because it puts you into fatigue, and not only hurts you, but it like prevents you from actually drawing those cards that you would have drawn. It like actually costs you cards. And if Banshee in a game costs you one card, it is no longer worth it. Like if you even touch fatigue, Banshee loses a whole lot of its value. So look at your decks. Also watch out in Warlock. If you have like a Doom or something. When you have a Banshee, it really does limit your ability to be like, this deck is going to draw to the bitter end, and it's going to hit this one card, and that's when that's one of my win conditions. It's one of my like, oh, I'm going to eventually hit the UI, and that's going to cause me to win the game. Or I'm eventually going to hit the Doom, it's going to cause me to win the game. And with Banshee, it affects that a bit more. So I think all of these situations are very like situational, in that you probably still pick the Banshee because they don't happen often enough. So you would only avoid the Banshee even in these situations that we're talking about if, one, like there are other good cards that you're selecting from, like other premium cards and a Banshee, right? And you take the other premium cards over the Banshee. Or two, your deck is really, really insanely good already. Like it's pick 22, you have like a god deck, you're very likely to get 12 wins. Like, don't screw with it by adding a Banshee to it. Like, I think those are kind of the scenarios in which you might think about not picking a Banshee. And of course, in terms of playing a Banshee, if you're getting towards the end of your deck, maybe like, you know, think twice about playing a Banshee because it may actually mill you into fatigue.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say it only applies like when your deck is like pretty heavy control-ish though, right? Because you can have a really good deck that still revolves around tempo.
Yes.
You know, like Scale Banes and Bone Mares and stuff. Banshee is amazing still in those decks, right? But
yes.
Yeah. Like Priest decks, for instance, like Priest decks where you're gonna take it real slow, you have 2 Dragonfires or whatever, you know you're gonna reset the board. I agree. In those kind of decks, you probably don't want it.
That sounds good. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So anything else we want to address before we close out this Lightforge? Any other topic you want to talk about in particular?
No, I mean, we went pretty well, and like what I wanted to talk about. It was fun to, you know, I always enjoy coming on here, like talking with my peers, right?
Yeah.
It was fun to do the whole Ungoro thing, like why, you know. like Merps and I maybe enjoyed it a bit more.
Because it was so skill intensive.
So skilled. Yeah, so skilled.
Merps, is it fair to say that Hearthstone Arena will never be as skill intensive as the July 2017 meta?
Truly the Un'Goro meta, and especially the month of July, right? Especially the later half of July, was just so complex. And you know what? I might have a lot of critics, but they just don't see the complexities like I do, right? And we will never have that again. It's just impossible. We have never seen that, and we never will again. So, you know, sucks to suck, I guess.
All right. So once again, this is Shadybunny joining us on the Lightforge today. Excellent arena streamer, very educational. Like really walks through the paces. Like great for learning. Like from like all levels when it comes to the arena. And Twitch.tv/Shadybunny. Twitter is F2K Shadybunny. And anything else you want to add, Shady?
Yeah, the YouTube Shadybunny Live. Try to add like my 12 win runs there, which are also like they usually last like 2 hours or whatever, just because I'm talking through all the plays. Like I always do co-ops, right? Like
yeah,
obviously familiar to people watching your channel, which I think helps the viewer understand because everything is verbalized. Like talk about all the plays.
Yeah, definitely. So check
out.
Very
happy to be here. Yep.
So check out the YouTube channel as well. Thank you, Shady. And if you want to see more Shadybunny, he's actually going to be on the Grinning Go channel tomorrow to do a co-op with me. So that's Monday night, the 9th, October 9th, to kick off the stream with us. So that'll be really fun. Yeah, I'm trying to go for the leaderboard this month. So we're gonna start it off with some Shady coaching to get back in the mindset. I had this like really unfortunate 12-win run followed by a 1-win run, which means the leaderboard hasn't actually started.
Yeah, you can't start with that.
No, completely wipes away the 12-win.
All right, guys, that's it for this week. Once again, thank you so much to Shady for coming on here. Good luck in the arena, everyone. And I think that is it. Are we signing off?
I'm signing off. Until next week, this is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Bye, guys.
This was Shady. See you guys.
All right. We are...